The command bunker was already darkening, the kind of artificial twilight that came from exhausted screens and dimmed lights. Digital maps glowed red across the walls, routes slashed through with failure, call signs crossed out like quiet graves. The air smelled of stale coffee and heat from overworked equipment, thick with the weight of decisions that had gone nowhere. A senior field commander stood at the center table, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. When the proposal appeared, he let out a short, sharp laugh, not because it was funny, because he was tired of being asked to believe in impossible answers. "One sniper," he said flatly, shaking his head. "That's what we're down to now?" A few officers exchanged looks. Someone exhaled through their nose, slow and disbelieving. The laughter didn't spread. It died where it landed, serving only to release fear for a second before it settled back heavier than before. Then a single name appeared on the screen. Female. Lone operator. The commander laughed once more, quieter this time, and looked away. No one spoke. The silence stretched, tight and uncomfortable. Outside that bunker, a trapped unit was still pinned, still waiting, and the clock toward midnight kept moving. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to FOB Veteran Stories. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Her name was Staff Sergeant Mara Kincaid. She was 32 years old, listed in the system as a precision fires support specialist temporarily attached to a logistics holding unit. On paper, it was the kind of assignment that made people skim past her name without a second thought. There was nothing about her current posting that suggested urgency or importance. She wasn't leading troops. She wasn't briefing commanders. She spent her days moving quietly between storage bays and observation rooms, checking equipment that rarely saw action and signing off on reports. No one read closely. She was off mission when the discussion about her began, sitting alone on a low metal bench near an equipment cage. Her posture was straight but relaxed, hands resting loosely on her thighs, shoulders settled as if they carried no weight at all. To anyone passing by, she looked like someone waiting for instructions that would never come. Other soldiers misread that stillness constantly. Some thought she was detached, mentally checked out. Others assumed she lacked ambition, that she was content being invisible in a place where louder voices climbed faster. A junior specialist once described her as forgettable. Another said she had the calm of someone who had never been tested. No one said these things to her face, but she felt the way conversations shifted when she entered a room, the way eyes slid past her instead of stopping. Mara breathed slowly, evenly, a habit she had carried for years without thinking about it. Inhale through the nose. Hold. Exhale just as controlled. Her eyes moved rarely, but when they did, they tracked exits, corners, distances, reflections. It wasn't nervousness. It was orientation. Her reputation followed her like a half-written sentence. Those who had known her earlier remembered fragments that didn't quite add up. A training course completed too quickly. A deployment cut short with no explanation. Commendations that were sealed and never discussed. To newer personnel, those gaps looked like failure or favoritism. To Mara, they were simply closed doors she had no interest in reopening. She reached into her pocket and rolled a small metal ring between her fingers, worn smooth from years of use. It was a grounding habit, something she did without looking, without acknowledging it. When the ring rested between her thumb and forefinger, her breathing slowed another fraction. Down the corridor, voices rose and fell from the command bunker. The tone carried even through reinforced walls, sharp with frustration and clipped authority. Maps were being argued over. Timelines redrawn. Words like unacceptable and untenable floated through the air. Mara didn't listen closely. She didn't need to. The cadence of command debate was always the same when options were running out. Inside the bunker, skepticism hardened into certainty. Someone pointed at her file and frowned. Another officer leaned back and crossed his arms. "She's a risk," one voice said, "not cruel. Just final." "Not enough," another added. "Not for this." The words were logged, noted, absorbed into the room's mood like background noise. No one suggested asking her opinion. No one questioned whether she might already understand the problem better than the map allowed. Mara stood and adjusted the strap of her watch, checking the fit by feel rather than sight. The watch was old, scratched, and deliberately simple. No glow. No alerts. Just time. A supply sergeant passed her and nodded out of habit. She nodded back, polite, neutral. The exchange meant nothing, and that was exactly how she preferred it. There was a faint scar along the edge of her jaw, pale and easy to miss unless the light caught it just right. Most people never noticed. Those who did usually assumed it came from training or some long-forgotten accident. She gathered her things slowly, methodically, the way she did everything. No wasted motion. No hurry. Urgency, she knew, was a feeling best avoided until it was truly necessary. Back in the bunker, the commander's patience thinned further. The idea on the screen remained unchanged, stubborn and singular. One operator. One name. The room filled with quiet resistance. Doubt settled in layers, each voice reinforcing the next. The consensus was forming without needing a vote. Mara stepped into the shadow of the corridor and paused, listening to her own breathing. She had never needed belief from a room full of people. She had learned long ago that confidence spoken aloud was often a liability. She never heard the laughter, never heard her name framed as a gamble. And even if she had, it wouldn't have changed anything. Because whether they believed in her or not, the night was coming. And she was already steady. The first update from the pinned unit came through broken and rushed. A burst of static, then a voice forcing calm where fear lived underneath. They had tried to shift positions by less than 10 meters. The response had been immediate. Precision fire from elevated angles. 2 near misses. 1 man grazed along the arm. No room to maneuver, no cover that held. Inside the bunker, the red markers on the map pulsed brighter, as if the system itself was trying to warn them. Every potential movement corridor lit up with overlapping lines of fire. The enemy wasn't reacting anymore. They were waiting. Someone suggested air support again, quieter this time, almost hopeful. The suggestion didn't last long. Restricted airspace. Civilian structures too close. Rules of engagement that had already been tested and failed. The answer came back the same way it always did. Denied. The senior commander rubbed his temples and leaned forward over the table. "So we're back where we started," he said. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut. "Pinned unit. No air. No artillery. And now we're pretending one shooter fixes all of that." A few tired smiles appeared. Not mocking laughter yet. Something closer to resignation pretending to be humor. A staff officer cleared her throat. She was younger than most in the room, her uniform still sharp, eyes sharp with it. "Sir," she said carefully, "with respect, she's not just one shooter." The commander didn't even look at her at first. "Everyone is just one person," he replied. "Physics doesn't change because we like a file. She has cleared hardened positions before," the officer pressed. "Alone. At night." That earned a short laugh from someone near the back. It was softer than before, almost apologetic. The kind of laugh people use when they don't want to be cruel, but don't believe you either. The commander finally turned. "You want to stake 23 lives on a resume that half this room can't even read?" His eyes flicked to the screen. "This isn't a training range. This is a system. And systems don't collapse because someone is very good." The officer opened her mouth again, then closed it. She nodded once and stepped back. The room moved on without her. As the debate continued, the energy shifted. Laughter drained away. Voices dropped. Words became clipped. Mockery gave way to something closer to discomfort. No one liked how few options remained. Another update came in. The trapped unit had gone silent again, deliberately this time. Radio discipline. Hiding their heat. Waiting. "How long can they hold?" someone asked. No one answered immediately. The commander glanced at the clock on the wall. Midnight was closer than it looked. When Mara was finally called in, it wasn't with ceremony. A runner found her near the equipment cage and told her she was needed in the briefing room. No explanation. No tone. She followed without comment. Inside the smaller briefing space, the mood was colder. Less debate. More consequence. The commander stood, arms folded again, eyes assessing her like a problem he didn't want to solve. "This is the situation," he said, gesturing to the map. "Enemy counter-sniper network controlling the sector. Multiple elevated positions. Thermal coverage. Overlapping fire. You have limited time." Mara nodded once. She didn't ask about the unit. She could see them marked on the map, boxed in by red lines. "If you fail," the commander continued, "we abort. No second attempt. No recovery for you." "I understand," she said. Her voice was even. No edge. No bravado. She studied the map more closely, not the red marks, but the spaces between them. Drainage routes. Dead zones. Structures labeled unsafe and ignored. "I'll need full darkness," she said after a moment. "No flares. No illumination rounds. No drones overhead once I'm inside." Someone scoffed softly. The commander's eyebrows lifted. "That's non-negotiable?" he asked. "Yes." He let out a breath through his nose. "You're asking us to blind ourselves." "I'm asking you not to blind me," she replied. The room went quiet again. "What else?" the commander asked. "No chatter on open channels," she said. "No updates unless I request them. And no movement from the trapped unit until I confirm." "That's a long time for them to sit still," someone muttered. "They're already sitting still," Mara said. "Movement is what's getting them shot." The commander stared at her for a long second. Then he shook his head slightly. "You want everything on your terms. I want the conditions that let me work," she said. "Or this won't work at all." There it was. The line no one liked hearing. The commander leaned back. "And how long do you think this takes?" he asked. Mara glanced at the clock on the wall. She didn't rush her answer. "Before midnight," she said. "If I'm not done by then, call it." That earned another laugh, sharper this time. "That's less than 2 hours," someone said. Mara didn't react. She adjusted the strap of her watch again, a small, habitual motion. "It's enough." The commander's tone hardened. "You fail, they die," he said bluntly. She met his eyes for the first time. Not challenging, not pleading. Just steady. "If I don't go," she replied, "they die anyway." That landed differently. Would you have spoken up in that room? Would you have trusted a voice that calm when everything else was collapsing? The commander looked away first. He exhaled slowly, the sound carrying more weight than his earlier laughter. "This is insane," he said, not angry now. Honest. He looked around the room. No one offered an alternative. No one met his eyes. The clock ticked. Finally, he nodded once. "You go," he said. "Midnight is your line. After that, we extract or we lose them." Mara nodded. Understood. No salute. No encouragement. Just a mission clock snapping into place. As she turned to leave, someone whispered, barely audible, "She's not enough." Mara didn't hear it. Or if she did, she gave it no space. She stepped back into the corridor, the noise of the bunker fading behind her. The night outside the wire was already settling, deep and patient. The clock was running. Mara prepared the way she always did, without hurry and without ceremony. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if time itself had widened around her. She laid each piece of equipment out in the same order, fingers checking weight and balance by instinct rather than sight. There were small markings on her rifle that didn't match standard issue, not decorative. Not personalized in any obvious way, Just faint, almost invisible lines near the rail and stock, placed where her hand naturally settled. Anyone else would have assumed wear and tear. Someone experienced might have recognized memory. A technical officer lingered near the doorway longer than necessary, pretending to review a tablet. He watched the way she adjusted the optic, the way she paused between steps. Most operators rushed at this stage, tightening straps, double-checking, burning nervous energy. Mara did none of that. She breathed once, slow and measured, then rolled her shoulders back as if easing into a familiar posture. Muscle memory took over. Nothing wasted, nothing added. "That's different," the officer muttered under his breath, not intending to be heard. She moved past him without acknowledging the comment, her boots placing softly despite the hard surface. She didn't hug walls or keep her head down like someone expecting contact. She walked as if the space already belonged to her. On the screens back in the bunker, enemy positions were outlined again and again. Professional setups, elevated hides, thermal overlap. Redundancies built on experience, not improvisation. These were not amateurs waiting to be surprised. They were patient, organized, lethal. Mara studied the terrain feed longer than anyone expected. She didn't focus on the threats themselves, but on the spaces between them, the gaps no one else bothered to annotate. Drainage lines, broken stairwells, collapsed rooftops dismissed as unusable. Minutes passed. The commander watched from the corner of the room, arms folded, jaw tight. He didn't comment on the delay, but something in his expression shifted. Unease, subtle and unwelcome. The kind that came when a plan stopped feeling theoretical and started feeling real. "She's taking her time," someone whispered. "She better," another replied. As Mara adjusted her gloves, a fragment of conversation drifted down the corridor behind her. Two soldiers passing, voices low. "Heard a call sign once," one said. "From another unit." "Sounded like a ghost story." "Probably nothing," the other answered. "People talk." The name never reached Mara. Or if it did, it meant nothing in that moment. She paused briefly to tighten a strap near her wrist, exposing a thin scar that curved just under the sleeve line. It was old, clean. Not the kind that demanded explanation. The fabric slid back into place, and the mark disappeared as if it had never been there. No one asked. The bunker settled into a waiting rhythm. Conversations died off. Chairs creaked. Screens hummed. Every few seconds, someone glanced at the clock and looked away again. No shots were fired. No alarms triggered. Nothing happened. And somehow, that nothing stretched tighter than noise ever could. Mara stood at the edge of the perimeter, eyes scanning the dark ahead. The night had fully arrived now, deep and layered, broken only by distant industrial outlines and faint ambient glow. She didn't rush to cross. She watched, listened, counted. In the bunker, the commander shifted his weight, then stopped himself from pacing. He said nothing. He didn't mock. He didn't doubt aloud. But the confidence he had worn earlier no longer fit the same way. Was this how it started, he wondered? Or was this how it failed? Mara lowered herself into a crouch and waited. Not because she had to, but because waiting revealed things movement never did. Air cooled. Heat signatures changed. Patterns breathed. Tension built not through action, but through restraint. Would you have trusted silence like this? Would you have believed that doing nothing, for now, was the most dangerous move of all? The clock continued its steady march toward midnight. And somewhere in that quiet, something began to shift. The first sign that something had changed was not a sound, but a gap. One of the enemy positions on the eastern edge of the grid stopped reporting. No burst of static. No final transmission. The marker on the screen simply went dormant, its thermal signature flattening into nothing. Lieutenant after lieutenant leaned closer to their displays. A technician tapped his keyboard, reran the feed, adjusted gain. Possible sensor dropout, he said, more to reassure himself than anyone else. The commander nodded once. Reset it. They did. The position remained empty. No one spoke. In a fight like this, absence was unsettling. It suggested either error or control. Minutes passed. Then a second position dimmed and vanished. This one sat higher, a reinforced nest overlooking the main access corridor. It had been flagged as one of the most dangerous angles, a position the commander himself had referenced earlier as proof that no single operator could survive this sector. Now, it was gone. Another sensor fault? Someone asked, the question thinner than before. The technician shook his head slowly. Different feed, different relay. A ripple of unease moved through the bunker. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat and didn't speak again. On a separate frequency, barely audible beneath layers of encryption, enemy radio traffic began to change. At first it was subtle, a clipped tone, a request repeated once too often. Then came sharper bursts of speech, questions without answers, confirmations that never arrived. Mara heard it all through the borrowed receiver tucked against her shoulder. She had taken it from the first position without ceremony, lifting it from a slack hand and silencing it before panic could travel outward. She did not linger. She never lingered. She moved low and wide, choosing paths that felt wrong to anyone trained to think like a soldier. She crossed exposed ground slowly, timing her movement with distant noise, letting the environment mask her instead of fighting it. She avoided obvious cover, knowing obvious places drew attention. The enemy expected aggression. She offered patience. A third position adjusted its scan pattern, sweeping wider, faster. That was the mistake. The change broke rhythm, created predictability. Mara watched the motion for a full minute before acting, letting the operators settle into the new pattern, letting confidence return just enough. When she fired, it was precise and final. No echo. No follow-up. She was gone before gravity finished its work. Back in the bunker, the commander leaned forward, hands flat on the table. His earlier skepticism had not vanished, but it had fractured. The map no longer told a simple story. How many? He asked quietly. 3, the technician replied. Confirmed. The word confirmed landed differently now. Enemy chatter spiked, overlapping voices bleeding into each other. Someone was issuing orders too quickly. Another was asking for confirmation that never came. The network was reacting, not coordinating. She's moving them, the younger staff officer said before she could stop herself. The commander didn't rebuke her this time. Mara relocated again, slower now. The pace was deliberate. She was not racing the clock. She was shaping it. Every minute she delayed forced the enemy to make choices. Every choice narrowed their options. She circled a hardened position twice without engaging, watching how the remaining shooter compensated for silence on adjacent channels. The man shifted coverage inward, tightening his focus, trusting his perimeter to teammates who no longer existed. When she finally took the shot, it came from an angle that made no tactical sense to anyone still thinking in straight lines. By the time the bunker registered the fourth silent position, the room had gone very still. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. Sir, the technician said carefully, this isn't random. The commander nodded once. I know. Midnight crept closer, but the sense of urgency changed shape. It was no longer about failure racing ahead. It was about success arriving sooner than anyone had dared to imagine. On the enemy channel, fear had begun to seep into voices trained to suppress it. Short commands gave way to clipped acknowledgments, then to silence punctuated by sudden movement. Someone fired prematurely. Another responded, and then another, shots cracking uselessly into darkness. Mara used the noise the way she used everything else. As cover. As misdirection. She fired once into an empty structure, not to hit anything, but to provoke. The response came exactly where she expected it to. A shooter turned. Another adjusted. A third broke position entirely, trying to relocate. She took them in sequence, not because it was faster, but because it was cleaner. Back in the bunker, a line officer finally spoke what everyone was thinking. This isn't luck. No one argued. The commander watched the map, his jaw set, eyes sharp now. Doubt had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something more dangerous. Awareness. "How long until midnight?" he asked. 47 minutes, came the reply. On the ground, Mara checked her watch. She did not speed up. She intercepted another position on a stairwell choked with debris, the kind of place planners marked as impassable. She waited, listening to the man above her breathe, to the subtle scrape of a boot against concrete. She did not rush the shot. When it came, it ended the sound entirely. Enemy radio traffic fractured after that. Commands overlapped. Call signs went unanswered. Someone demanded accountability in a voice that cracked halfway through the sentence. The commander recognized that tone. He had heard it before, years ago, on a different battlefield, when momentum broke and fear rushed in to fill the gap. "She's collapsing the system," he said quietly. Respect did not announce itself. It crept in, unwelcome and undeniable. By the time the count reached 8, no one in the bunker questioned whether she belonged out there. They questioned only how they had ever doubted it. Would you have admitted it out loud? Or would you have sat in that room, feeling belief shift under your feet, afraid to name it? Mara moved again, always after the enemy reacted, never before. She let them chase shadows, let them fire at nothing, let them exhaust themselves trying to regain control. Midnight was no longer a threat. It was a marker she was approaching on her own terms. The commander glanced at the clock once more, then back to the map. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Hold all movement," he ordered. "Let her work." No one objected. Out in the darkness, Mara paused at the edge of a collapsed structure and listened. The night had changed. The air felt different, less crowded. She counted remaining voices, remaining heat, remaining mistakes. The power had shifted. Not with an explosion, not with a speech, just with absence. And as the clock continued its quiet march forward, something unspoken settled over the bunker. This was no longer a gamble. This was a demonstration. The shift came quietly, the way real realizations always did. A new figure stepped into the bunker without announcement, older than most in the room, his presence changing the air before anyone fully turned. He studied the screens for several seconds without speaking, eyes moving not to the blinking markers themselves, but to the order in which they had gone dark. He raised one hand. Not sharply, not urgently. Just enough. The room stopped. "That pattern," he said, voice low, almost thoughtful. "It's not random." No one answered. The commander straightened slightly, uncertain now, watching the older officer's posture change as recognition settled in, shoulders back. Chin lifting a fraction. The look of someone who had seen this before, somewhere else, a long time ago. He leaned closer to the display. "She's not clearing positions the way doctrine teaches," he continued. "She's collapsing decision-making. That's not standard sniper work." His gaze moved to the name line on the screen. "Staff Sergeant Mara Kincaid," he said, pronouncing it cleanly, without hesitation. "Former long-range interdiction specialist. Night operations. Solo tasking authority." The commander went still. The older officer's voice didn't rise. It softened, edged now with something like respect. "Last I heard that name," he added, "it was attached to a classified after-action report none of us were supposed to talk about." A few officers shifted. Someone inhaled sharply and forgot to exhale. "She doesn't hunt targets," the senior authority said. "She hunts systems." The commander's mouth opened, then closed. He stared at the screen again, at the quiet spaces where enemy positions had been. The laughter from earlier echoed in his mind, suddenly heavy, suddenly wrong. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence that followed was not awkward this time. It was reverent. On the live feed, far from the bunker, Mara knelt in shadow, adjusting her position by inches. Her eyes never left the dark ahead. Her breathing remained slow, controlled. The same as it had been an hour ago, when no one in this room had believed in her. The senior authority lowered his hand. "Do not interrupt her," he said simply. "Do not rush her. And do not make the mistake of thinking this is luck." The commander nodded once, stiffly. He did not trust his voice. On the screen, another marker blinked, then disappeared. Mara didn't look up. She didn't pause. She didn't acknowledge the weight shifting hundreds of meters away, in a bunker she would never see. She just continued working. And for the first time that night, every person watching understood exactly who they had sent into the dark. The last two enemy positions fell within minutes of each other, both before the clock reached midnight. There was no dramatic spike in noise, no final exchange of fire that announced an ending. One marker dimmed, then another, their heat signatures flattening into the same quiet absence as the rest. The bunker did not erupt. It exhaled. For a few seconds, no one spoke at all. Technicians stared at their screens, hands frozen above keyboards. Someone checked a secondary feed, then a third, searching for the mistake they expected to find. There was none. All hostile positions neutralized, came the confirmation at last. The voice delivering it was steady, professional, almost subdued. "Sector is clear." The order to extract the trapped unit followed immediately, issued without flourish or hesitation. A quick reaction force moved in under strict radio discipline, expecting resistance that never came. They advanced carefully at first, weapons raised, eyes searching rooftops and windows that had haunted them for days. There was nothing waiting. When the trapped unit finally received the confirmation, they did not move right away. 3 days of being hunted had rewired their instincts. Silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like a trap. Only after the order was repeated, slower this time, did they begin to withdraw, one by one, covering each other with the kind of care that came from surviving something none of them would forget. All 23 came out alive. Back in the bunker, the confirmation rolled through the room in a low wave. Relief showed itself in small ways, a hand dropping from a clenched fist, a shoulder sagging, a breath released that no one realized they had been holding. The commander stood still at the center table, eyes fixed on the cleared map. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he keyed his mic, switched to the secure channel, and spoke directly. "Staff Sergeant Kincaid," he said. There was a pause before her reply came back, faint but clear. "Go ahead." His voice was different now. Lower, measured. "The unit is moving. They're clear. All of them." "Understood," she replied. No change in tone. No question asked. The commander hesitated, then straightened. In the quiet of the bunker, he brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate salute, holding it for a second longer than protocol demanded. No one else moved. When he lowered his hand, the gesture lingered in the room like an echo. Faces around him reflected a complicated mix of emotions. Shame for the laughter that had come too easily. Relief for lives returned from the edge. Awe for the discipline it took to do what she had done alone. On the live feed, Mara remained crouched in shadow, scanning the dark for a full minute after the last position went silent. She did not celebrate. She did not relax. She waited, ensuring the night truly belonged to her before she released it. When she finally moved, it was unhurried. She checked her watch once, then adjusted her pack and faded back the way she had come, leaving nothing behind that marked her passing. In the bunker, no one spoke her name again. There was no applause, no raised voices. Just a room full of professionals who had witnessed something rare and knew better than to diminish it with noise. The extraction completed without incident. The map went dark, screens dimmed. The crisis that had filled the bunker hours earlier receded, leaving behind only the memory of how close it had come to ending differently. Mara did not ask for acknowledgement. She did not wait for it. The honor had already been given, quietly, in the only way that mattered. And then the night settled, still and complete, as if it had never been contested at all. The bunker looked different once the urgency was gone. Screens dimmed to idle displays, maps cleared of red lines, the hum of equipment settling into a low, almost tired rhythm. People moved more slowly now, as if unsure what to do with the space left behind when a crisis ends without loss. The commander remained at the table long after most had turned away. He stared at the blank grid where the enemy network had been, his reflection faint in the glass. Earlier laughter replayed in his mind, each echo heavier than the last. He did not excuse it. He owned it. Leadership, he knew, wasn't measured by never being wrong, but by recognizing the cost of doubt when it came too easily. He stepped aside and removed his cap, running a hand through his hair. 23 names scrolled across his thoughts, no longer as call signs, but as faces that would go home. The decision he had mocked had saved them. That truth would stay with him longer than any report. Mara never returned to the bunker. When she came back through the perimeter, it was hours later, the same way she had left. Quiet, unnoticed. Her gear was intact, her movements unhurried. To anyone passing, she looked like someone finishing a long shift rather than someone who had rewritten a battlefield. A recommendation for commendation was drafted and then quietly set aside. When the idea was mentioned to her, she shook her head once. No speeches, no ceremony. Recognition drew attention, and attention had a way of eroding the very discipline that kept people alive. She preferred the work to remain nameless. By the next morning, her assignment line in the system was already shifting again, returning her to a role that invited no questions. The corridor swallowed her the same way it always had. Stories would circulate, of course. They always did. Whispers passed between professionals who knew better than to exaggerate. A night when the enemy owned the dark and one person took it back without asking for permission. This story is not about perfection. It isn't about heroics shouted across a room or victories announced with raised voices. It is about patience under pressure. About discipline when fear demands speed. About doing the work correctly when no one is watching. True strength rarely announces itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't seek belief. It simply shows up, does what must be done, and disappears again, leaving others to live with the quiet results. Somewhere tonight, a service member is standing watch without an audience. No camera, no applause. Just discipline, patience, and the quiet understanding that doing the job right matters more than being seen doing it. Stories like this don't belong to one person alone. They belong to every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who has carried responsibility in silence, who has been underestimated, overlooked, or doubted, and did the work anyway. If you've ever served, or if someone you love has, this story is for you. It's a reminder that courage doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it moves carefully through the dark and leaves nothing behind but lives still breathing. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more FOB veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.